wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
Where I was reminded.
I have a hole in my stomach!
You are leaving
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen.
Good morning. Happy Sunday morning. I am so glad you're joining me today. We have got an exciting broadcast for you today. And I think it's exciting anyway, because we have, and when I say we, I'm talking about my co-host, Lila Tuller, and we have invited the infamous Natasha Helfer. And I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's got so much credibility. And Natasha is going to help us talk about aging from the sense of our sexuality, our identity, our comfortablessness, I think that's a word, in our own bodies as we're aging. And I know that that's kind of a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I hear a lot of people talk about health. And as you know, I've already had a guest on my show that we're talking about fitness and how important that is. But there's other parts of it as we age. And there's things that are out of our control, but there's a lot of things that are in our control. And so let me bring on Natasha and Lila, and let's get this party going. Because sadly, I know that it's Super Bowl Sunday. And that some of you might want to go watch a football game in about 4 hours, unless you're crazy and you're going to start watching it now, where they start going through the childhoods, the birth scenarios of the players, their first girlfriends, their favorite color, their favorite cake. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't know how you guys do it, but I know that a lot of you do. In fact, let me tell you a little secret. I went in to get a massage the other day, and there were these 3 women standing right at the desk where you go in and check in. And so I'm trying to kind of work around them so that I can get in there and sign in for my massage. They're talking about football. And I was like, what is happening to this world? I do not understand this, but that's just me. So anyway, let me bring on my beautiful guest. Hello, Lila. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Renee. I love your Valentine's Day theme you got going. So
yeah,
cool. I forgot about it. So
yeah. I have Valentine's Day things. I don't have Christmas sweaters. So, but I'll jump on the pink anytime I can.
Yeah,
exactly.
Great.
So let's bring on our guest, Natasha.
Yes, let's.
There she is.
Hello. Oh, I'm so glad to be with you.
I am so glad you could too. And the timing was so perfect with Valentine's Day coming up, which I actually hate because it's a Hallmark holiday. And there's so many sad stories around Valentine's Day, more sad stories than happy stories, but it gave us a topic. It gave us a theme. And, as a woman, if I was preparing a Relief Society lesson, there would be hearts and flowers and pink cupcakes. So it just goes with the flow, right? So
let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So Natasha, introduce yourself to any of the people that are watching that are not either LDS or ex-Mormons, and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into your field of speciality and where you're at with that.
Okay. Well, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. Have been doing that for almost 30 years. That's been a long time. And then about 15 years ago, I decided to further my education and become sex therapy certified. So got into a lot of more education and ideas about that. And the reason why I was interested in that was primarily with the intersection of all the clients I was seeing. So I do come from a Mormon / Latter-day Saint background. And I've also lived in a lot of areas where there's kind of a lot of, conservative religious folks, whether it's like Bible Belt, Wichita, Kansas, or more of the like Lutheran and Methodist areas of like Wisconsin and Michigan and those areas. So lots of themes would come in that I would say would be intersecting between like sexual information, sexual education, which not a lot of people get, religious standards around sexuality, and then mental health and sexual health and relational health. So I just became more and more interested in that, and how those things all interweave in people's wellness and, well-being and quality of life and quality of relationships. And there's a lot of issues. Mostly education is a big one. Permission is another big one. And I think just misconceptions, gender stereotypes, a lot of sexual shame, a lot of purity culture that interfere with our sexual pleasure. So that's my jam. That's what I love to do. That's what I love to talk about. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, and I love that. I love that you saw it as a progression because it was a demand that you saw. I love that you mentioned that living in the Bible Belt, you're dealing with Christianity in general, not just Mormonism. And I see that a lot lately because especially we're in this high political season right now. So this Christian nationalist movement is heavy and strong. And I know for those of you in Utah, there was a big brouhaha about, is it Michelle Klein? A school board member that was shaming a member of the girls basketball team. And so that's the thing. So there's so much in sexuality and identity that's in the news right now. So I love that you recognized that there was a demand for this. You could see that there was mental health issues over this. And then you decided to extend your knowledge and start treating people. I love that.
Yeah, that was Natalie Klein, by the way. And
Natalie Klein,
I guess my story kind of has a big, well, at least in the middle of my life, has a big ending with myself getting excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that happened back in 2021. And the concerns that were being brought up to me as far as their reasoning why mostly had to do with my role as a sexual health advocate for things like supporting gay marriage, supporting seeing masturbation as normative human behavior, and also my views on sexually explicit materials and pornography and how, even though for some people those things can kind of become obsessive and impulsive, we have this very common trend in religious communities where we treat it from a sexual addiction model, which is really not seen as best standards of care, nor is there any research supporting the efficacy of those kinds of treatments approaches. So those were the issues that I was bringing up in my community that kind of got me in trouble with my church and my faith, and that's the decision they went forward with. So,
and it was an amazing. I followed your story, and I think the mind-boggling part of your story was the fact that you had moved out of the state of Missouri. You were no longer living there. You're in a completely different state, thousands of miles away. And yet somehow the system thought, no, we're going to deal with this here. And we're going to blow all of our rules and all of our, standards that we tell people that it's always a local thing, that it doesn't come from the hierarchy at the top. And this is just something that your local congregation was worried about, and all of the just faults. It was just lies. And the effort that was done to excommunicate you from the Church of Jesus Christ for teaching principles that you were taught as a professional and helping people in their mental health. Just mind-blowing. It was, yeah. And like you say, 2021. It wasn't like back in 2006, 2005, 1997. This is very, very current. So what would you say, who are your prominent demographics that you see in your mental health care?
Yeah. And by the way, just a quick correction, that was Wichita, Kansas, not Missouri, but
okay.
I know all those states
somewhere in the Midwest. Yeah.
Right there. Yeah, I think that my main demographic is probably people from the ages of, 30 to 60 about, I'm guessing. I definitely have some younger people that come to my practice and definitely people in the older categories, but that's probably somewhere in there. And I would say most of them are either in mixed faith relationships or they are nuanced. And what we usually mean by that is that they're in a faith community, but they don't necessarily abide by all of the ideas. They still find value in their church and in their faith community, but they may be struggling with certain standards or doctrines that they're not totally on board with. And then, of course, there's been a great exodus in organized religion in general. The national pews are showing that all religions are losing people, and that although people still find spirituality very meaningful and valuable in their life, they're not as inclined to be part of an organized religion. And so that's been a trend that's been kind of happening over the last decade, but held steady pretty for a long time, for like decades before that, so for about decades, we had like 70% of people in the United States affiliating with a religion. And now we're under half, we're just slightly under half of people. So that's a huge difference to have happened really in just one decade. So, so there's lots of post-Mormons, ex-Mormons. We even get other people from other spaces that find us because we advertise faith transitions and faith transition work as far as my practice. So I've got people from Jehovah's Witnesses, from the Evangelical Bible Belt, from Southern Baptist belts. We've got some Orthodox Jewish people who come. We've got members of the Sikh community. So there's definitely people who are facing similar issues, similar markers that they no longer necessarily feel inclined to live by. But especially when you're coming from high demand, high control, conservative religious communities, that shift of leaving your communities often comes at a much higher cost and price than those who maybe come from more liberal or progressive faith communities. So because this, the kind of like with my excommunication, that's in some ways that is shocking, in other ways it isn't, because in these high demand religions, if you don't conform, that's kind of one of the main markers of what it means to be a good person of that community is conformity. Whereas progressive churches have more tolerance for differences of opinion or differences of belief. So that's what happens. It comes at a much higher cost.
Do you see a difference between, let's say, like you were saying, where you were living before, where it's kind of the Bible Belt and you've got conservative evangelical or Baptist or conservative religious Christians, but there's a difference between what they consider, say, modesty versus what the LDS people considered modesty. And I bring that question up because I grew up pretty much as a Methodist until the age of 12 when my parents joined the church. And my family was all pretty much a version of Protestantism, Lutheran, Church of the Brethren, some kind of Methodist Protestant type religion. And very, very Jesus-based, very belief in Jesus and this kind of stuff. But I don't remember growing up, even up until the age of 12, I had a sunsuit that I wore as a little girl. Nobody talked to me about what bathing suit I should wear. Or my mom didn't have a problem wearing, a 1950s or 1960s, sleeveless dress with the jewel collar, or maybe even a crop top in the 50s. Believe it or not, those were possible, kids. I know you think you all invented it, but they did have crop tops in the 50s and the 60s. And, and there was nothing ever came into our heads that there was some kind of immodesty or walking pornography. But when you get into high demand religions, I know not just Mormonism, but other really, really high demands where elbows need to be covered, shoulders need to be covered, knees need to be covered. But in the LDS community, they have a sacred undergarment that they wear that unless you know the clues to look for as a Mormon, people in the outside world would just think, well, she wears a t-shirt underneath her sunsuit, or she always wears some kind of a, what do they call the knit, little sleeve things?
Little shrug.
Yeah, like a shrug or something like that. Or if you invite a friend to be a bridesmaid in your wedding and she happens to be Mormon, everybody else is in a sleeveless gown. She's got on a shrug or some kind of a thing over her gown so that her shoulders aren't showing. And so leaving that religion is not just changing your version of a belief in Christ, but it's also your clothing. And that's got to be hard for some people. It wasn't for me because I took my Hawaii clothes. When we went to Hawaii, there were Hawaii clothes, and then there were I'm back home now clothes. And so I never had a problem with that. But you have got to see people that are mentally struggling with this idea.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Modesty standards show up in different religious backgrounds. I mean, you've got, people like from the Amish community or the fundamental Latter-day Saint community that the dress is very clear. They are definitely othering themselves from mainstream culture, and they're setting themselves apart, right, from the world. So you see that in Orthodox Judaism as well, with certain, especially things that the men wear in that community. So, yes, these are called markers, right? Markers that people will pay attention to know whether or not you have those markers and what that means about your commitment and your worship and how loyal you are being to the faith community. So it's a way to see if you fit in or not. And yes, you're right. In Latter-day Saint land, we have the garments, and those of us who are within the faith, we can tell very clearly. We know what to look for to make sure we know that you're wearing garments or not, right? So these things, for some people, I'm never going to say for all people, right? Because there's always, but in general, what my experience has been, and even with some articles that have come out about Mormon and Latter-day Saint women, is that this trends to interfere with sexual drive, right? And sexual ideas around feeling sexy, feeling sensual. And in fact, even those ideas in general are typically frowned upon, right? So usually in high demand religions, the idea of being sexy and sensual are seen as seductive things, as slutty things, as things that, not the kind of girl that you take home to mom type of thing would do or would behave or would act that way. And so we highly monitor female sexuality through this kind of modesty rhetoric and how she presents her body. Well, as you can imagine, it's difficult to walk around with your body in a certain way and for many years prior to, for example, getting married, and then all of a sudden feel differently about your body once you are married, and only in certain sections where your husband gets to see you naked, right? So this starts psychologically interfering with the surrender and the pleasure and the fantasy and the freedom necessary for typically what we might define sexual satisfaction.
Yeah. And so when you have people coming to you with struggles with this, with their body image, they're comfortable in their sensuality in their 30s or in their 40s, do you see mostly the women, or do you see couples? Do you see men struggling with their wives or girlfriends' new sensuality, and they're not comfortable with that because of rhetoric or indoctrination that they've been taught? And you have to somehow, how do you deal with that as a professional when you've got suddenly, someone's in something as simple as a tank top, which the world would look at and go, what's the big deal? But an LDS or a Mormon person, or even somebody from a high fundamental religion would be like, well, now she's just going to be a hooker. Forget it. You might as well get divorced because she's on her way to the strip club, right? So that's a lot to unindoctrinate somebody. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, and it depends who's coming in, because not everybody who's coming in wants to be quote unquote indoctrinated. They're still very much within their belief system, and they still want to be part of their faith community, but they're still having these kinds of issues. And before I got excommunicated, the majority of the people really that I was working with in the first half of my career were active Latter-day Saints. They were believing, active, temple-going Latter-day Saints coming in and talking about sexual issues and sexual problems. it's when people have left the church, right, that then they start having more of this perspective of, wow, how was I impacted by these beliefs? Do I still want to have these beliefs? Maybe now I'm angry that I had these beliefs, and how I feel like I can see now how it held me back or didn't let me develop sexually the way that I feel like I should have been allowed to. So there's a lot of grief and anger and betrayal feelings, plus the deconstruction of, well, now, even though intellectually I've decided it's okay to wear that tank top, why is it that I'm so uncomfortable in my body when I step outside the door, or I'm hypersensitive or hypervigilant to how other people may look at me when they can tell I don't have movements, and I know that they're micromanaging whether, what I'm doing, and they're coming up maybe with some of these concerns or worries, because yes, usually in these cultures, there is a rhetoric from the leadership that says, if you go down these roads of exploration, that's a danger zone. And if you just go with the idea that once you get started, it's like a snowball or a slippery slope, and you're going to just head on down the road of debauchery and evil and perversion, and you will lose sight of having the spirit, and then you will be deceived by Satan. And so that's a lot of stuff that you've been hearing for decades. And now when you're trying to practice some of these new ways of carrying your body, or what you wear, or even how you want to show up sexually with your partner or partners, that can feel like, oh, it's still in my bones, right? It's still in my emotions. Even though I've changed my mind intellectually, I still have guilt. I'm still crying after I orgasm, after I've, used my vibrator and masturbate, for example, right? And so I'm in tears, even though it was pleasurable while I was doing it. Afterwards, I feel all this guilt and shame. So yes, it is a deconstruction process, and it takes time, and sometimes it takes support, and some, from either a professional like me, or friends, or, there's a lot of good sexual education that's becoming more and more available, although it's hard to know because sometimes it's mixed in with a lot of mixed bags of education. Anyway, so it's a process, right? I think either way. So how do I help people? Well, I do have to really get in tune with, what are their values? Where are they currently at in their spiritual and religious journey? Where do they want to be? What are the tasks, right, that they are up against? And really, regardless whether or not they are still believing or have left their church communities, there's definitely lots of things that we can do to better communication, to better sexual education. I'm most familiar with my own faith community, and I would say, anecdotally, Latter-day Saints are pretty open to education. They're pretty open to science for the most part. I mean, I know there's the fringe Latter-day Saints who are not as much. And I've seen also in the younger generations, much more likelihood to be comfortable with things like sex toys, or fantasy talk, or different positions, or having, like maybe not all the way to what we might consider mainstream pornography, but erotica as part of their, lives together. And so they're apt to be more creative, whereas folks who are 50 plus usually have a harder time with that. And when you think about historically, what we were up against are a lot of the messages in the 70s and 80s from our prophets that were all about masturbation being, leading you to like debauchery and homosexuality and all these like really horrible things that they would correlate those things to. There was a letter in the 80s that was sent out to bishops that said any type of oral sex was going to be considered unholy and unrighteous. And although that was rescinded, like within a short amount of time, like 6 months, nobody really got on the microphone and said, hey, by the way, we've rescinded this, right? And so I will see people from all ages and all generations have very different ideas about what is considered righteous sex, even within our own faith community, just because of when they were growing up and what messages they were hearing at the time.
Right. And Lila, you had a very complicated awakening, because you not only awakened to what you described as, I know this church is not the true church that I thought it was, but your father was a general authority, and then you left your marriage, and then you cared for your ex-husband as he was dying. And so you've got a complicated life where now you've left the church. You also live in Utah, so you live inside the bubble.
Yeah.
So tell a little bit about how you were able to, or were you able to come into your own sexuality, and how did your family respond to that the first time you wore something that was not garment approved, or, how did you work through all of that? And Natasha, I have to say, I listened to one of your podcasts or one of your somethings, and when you said the word common values, that was like the phrase that I needed when I resigned my membership and my husband was struggling. And I said, the most important thing is that we have common values. And that was something that I took from you, and that he was able to go, oh, okay, let's figure out what we both agree on, what we both believe is right or wrong, whether it is or not. And we're both going to live our common values, even if we have a different religion. And there's still problems with that because, just personality. I mean, there's just always going to be an extrovert and introvert and all of that kind of stuff. So that all comes into play. But how did you handle that, Lila?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Because, I have several of my kids are active. I have 3, that are out with me. But the active ones are very, they're very accepting of me. They're very sweet to me. We haven't had bad feelings. There was a time when I first left, and when I did my Mormon Stories podcast, I had my kids upset about that. Mm-hmm. But if you're asking about, the transition from the orthodoxy and the way that we're taught about our sexuality to being out of that and how I view everything now, I mean, it's been a huge change for me. All of a sudden, none of those things are bad. Nothing is sinful. And I started dating, and I did not want to date any LDS men. I just didn't want to. I wasn't out of the church yet. I was still in the church when I started dating. And I just knew that somehow in my psyche, it was like, no, I'm not going back to that. There's that patriarchy thing, and it's just like the way you're viewed. And I just knew I didn't want to be in that again. So I was dating non-member guys, even never Mormon guys. And I'm sure that was disturbing maybe to my kids, but I just, I'm at a stage of life, I'm almost 63, where of course, I adore my kids beyond words, and they mean everything to me. But you can't live your life based on what your kids might think, or your parents, or your friends, or your neighbors even, because it's more of what I came to decide, what I came to understand for myself was what I lived inside the church was this sort of it was like a heavy weight on me that wasn't allowing me to be me. Mm-hmm. And I felt that deeply. I was always stifling myself. I was always, pushing myself down. Oh, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't wear that. You shouldn't go there. You shouldn't do that. And once I got out and I realized I've wasted so many years of my life living that way, I can't do anymore. And my kids if they love me, they'll accept me. And if they don't, they won't. I guess I'll just have to find out.
Right.
And really, they've been amazing. They've been so great. They love me. I feel it. And if I show up, to babysit for my daughter, who I do quite a bit, in my workout clothes, and I don't have my garments on. Well, I never wear them anymore, but they don't know like what I'm wearing right now. They may not know unless they look for that little,
the marker, as Natasha says. Yeah.
The marker. They know I don't wear them, but it doesn't affect our relationship. And I'm so grateful for that. I know that isn't everyone's experience.
Right.
My parents are both dead. I don't have to worry about their judgment on me. And I do have a boyfriend who's never been Mormon, and he has helped me so much to shed a lot of my Mormon thinking. Like he'll, from the beginning of dating, he would say, where did that idea come from? And I'd be like, I've always had that. You know, I mean, I always was raised with that. And he'd say, no, that's not normal. That's not right. You need to take a look at that, because that's not the way I feel, or most of the people I know feel.
Right.
Yeah. I kind of, it's a process of shedding the deeply entrenched beliefs and teachings, but it's intentional for me. I'm always,
Right.
oh, that's my Mormon brain. That's my Mormon brain. And set that aside and be like, you know, I don't have to think that way anymore. I don't have to worry about that. My neighbors here in my neighborhood know I don't go to church. I'm not LDS anymore. And they're all Mormon, you know, on all sides. But they're sweet and friendly. And I don't know if they're threatened by me. I can't worry about that. I just can't. You know, when I was first, I'll just really quickly tell you this, and this is kind of interesting. When I was first divorced and I had moved to Lehi from Orem, and I was going to church still, and I show up at church, I'm this single woman. I have no kids in tow. I have no husband in tow. I'm just there sitting by myself. And I felt like a weirdo, and because I was the only, like, I looked around, I felt like I was the only one. But I was treated very interestingly. Men would not talk to me. Women would not talk to me. It was only the Relief Society president and her counselor that came to my house and met me. They were the only ones that would speak to me at church. I was treated like a diseased leper or something, you know, in that congregation, because I was not in the, you know, I was just a threatening woman, I suppose. And
so Natasha, weigh in on that, because I mean, obviously we're speculating. We can't read people's minds, but what do you think she was experiencing?
Well, I think in Mormon land, there's definitely been a huge push for people to mistrust the opposite sex, right? We pretend like the only attraction that happens, first of all, happens heterosexually. So there's that. And then because sexual desire and sexual, you know, eroticism is so dangerous, and it has to be so contained within, you know, that marriage of a man and a woman, even kind of things that we might consider silly, like, you know, a man, you know, a 40-year-old man giving a 70-year-old woman a ride home from church is frowned upon, because you never know, there could be some debauchery that happens. And so, yes, when you are single, when you've been a married woman and now you are single, which also implies that you have sexual awareness and sexual awakening, men in that congregation are going to not want to talk to you, because it could be seen like, you know, maybe I'm being, you know, inappropriately flirtatious, or I'm taking advantage, or is my wife going to be uncomfortable that I'm paying, you know, attention? Because we don't know how to be friends with people of the opposite sex in Latter-day Saint land, right? And so men, I'm not surprised at all that men are ignoring you. It's like, no, I can't. It's not. I mean, I don't think that men really even talk to you when you're married, hardly, unless you're in a calling, right? And so because men are just not talking to anybody other than their wives or other men. And then women, I think there is a bit of a, like, I think, discomfort on knowing what the heck to talk about. We now no longer share the main experience that we're all having at Latter-day Saint Church, which is how to be married and how to be celestial and how to be an eternal family. So that's all the language that we use. And so now if I've got a person who's divorced, we have lost a lot of language. There's not a lot of role modeling. So I think there's a discomfort. Sometimes there might be this like unnecessary pity as well, like and that makes people uncomfortable on both sides of the equation. So plus they also may see you as a sexual threat to their spouses. There's a lot of subconscious stuff going on there. I'm sure if you stopped any Latter-day Saint person and say, hey, do you treat a divorced person in your ward differently than a single person? They'd be like, of course not. I would never do that. Why would we do that? But these are very subconscious cultural norms that we don't even kind of realize we're doing it.
I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So let's get into the nitty gritty, because I have a habit sometimes of getting away from my title of my podcast. But when you have women coming to you, Natasha, that are over the age of 60, what is the biggest frustration that they're sharing with you?
Well, there's a lot of frustrations. So which one do I want to pick?
Maybe this will turn into a 5-hour thing, because yeah, seriously, where do we begin? Yeah.
Well, again, I think that there are two. If I'm going to, sweep with wide brushes, there's kind of two general things that are happening. Oftentimes, by the time women become menopausal and maybe have been, again, coming from my background, usually married in long-term relationships. Typically, if you look at the history of those long-term relationships, there's been a lot of like sexual dissatisfaction, sexual wounding, a lot of maybe duty and obligatory sex, which we see a lot of in religious communities, especially being accommodated by a female body. A lot of times women are done. Like, I don't want to be sexual anymore. I don't, this hasn't really been that great for me. I don't know why I'm still being, expected to be sexual. Like, these are my years to kind of just relax and not do things for other people as much, because again, sex has really been about another person, not so much about themselves and their own pleasure. That has not been central. And so there's that, dynamic, and then their spouse may or may not be in a same place. They may still want to be sexual, and these are like the last years to enjoy this. And so there's this struggle that's happening, in kind of these older years. But another very common thing that's happening for women in their 60s is that this is kind of a rejuvenation time. This is a time when it's like, by the time you're hitting your mid 50s, you're kind of starting to care really quite a bit less about what people think about you. Kind of like Lila was saying, like, enough, enough. I don't want to live my life anymore kind of through the gaze of other people's perceptions and whether or not they're going to, approve of me. And so I don't care so much that I've got these tummy rolls, and I don't care that I've got some wrinkles, and I'm going to just embrace my body and, fuck anybody who body shames me from here on out. We kind of get this like renewed, like feminist awakening, and we're strong, and I'm just going to go and enjoy the rest of my life. And I want to have sex, and I want to have sex in ways that maybe I hadn't considered before. And I do want to center my pleasure. And sometimes their partners are hitting a stage of life where, especially if they're with heterosexual partners, their penises are not working as well. Their testosterone is lowering. Their kind of issues with all the messages that we give males as far as what it means to be studly and cool and sexy are starting to feel like insecurities. So they're withdrawing. They're withdrawing sexually. And the wife is the one who's like, hey, this is important. Let's do this. What's wrong? And so sometimes they're kind of like switching positions where maybe he pursued her all through the childbearing years. And now she's like, hold on, now I'm pursuing you. What's wrong? What, why is this changing? Yeah. So those are some basic presentations that might come in. But regardless of who comes in, I mean, I think a lot of women do have some trepidation around aging and what that means for their sexuality. What's going on with menopause? What's going on with my hormones? What's going on with vaginal dryness? Why is this less comfortable, even though I enjoy it more? Am I having some genital pain I've never had before? Or genital pain I've ignored for many years, I can no longer ignore. So there's, and of course, there's lots of things that happen with age that are frustrating, whether, oh, now I'm not as flexible, or I have a bit of arthritis, or, I have mobility limitations, right? As far as how I can move my hips, or I used to really love being on my knees, and now my knees hurt, So those are kinds of things that can be frustrating. And if people aren't careful, can kind of, they can be hurdles that can shut down your sexual life if you allow that to happen instead of getting creative. We know that people who get creative and who have positive attitudes about sexuality trying to have much longer, much satisfying sex lives. But we can get into this, but it doesn't always mean intercourse. Sex doesn't always mean intercourse. That's another thing.
Right. And I think that's so important to understand that. And as in all health issues, women are usually the ones willing to go to the doctor and say, I'm not happy about this. I'm going to go to the doctor and find out what I can do. And men are usually, they only go to the doctor when the ambulance pulls up and takes them because they have to. And so they don't look at their aging the way women look at their aging. And women, I feel, and I could be wrong, but we also look at the whole picture. Like we look, well, our skin and our hair and the vaginal dryness. And, even if we do want to have sex, it hurts because of the vaginal dryness. And I'm not happy with that. So I'm going to go to the doctor and I'm going to find out what's going on. So you go to the doctor, they test your hormones. They go, well, first of all, you don't have any. So let's start there. And so then they start taking hormone replacement. And all of a sudden they have more energy. They're not as tired. Their vaginal dryness has gone away. They're taking testosterone. So their sex, drive is a little bit heavier. And now, like you say, there's a reversal where before you had this, 25-year-old guy that you're like, geez, we just did it. Leave me alone. Give me a break. I got a baby. I got to go nurse. Leave me, and now you've got, and you're like, come on, let's do it. And the husband's like, didn't we just do this last week? And you're like, what is happening? It's unfair. It's like if there was a God, this would be the one thing where I'd be like, you need to get this put together. But I mean, even like you say, growing up, I remember, and this is going to sound really stupid, and I hope I don't sound too stupid, but thank you, Oprah, because I was married and had children. I don't remember how many. When I was listening to an Oprah thing and they were talking about the clitoris, and I'm like, what is that? I have no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so there was, here I am in a sexual relationship and I'm like, are we done yet? Could we get this over with so I can go to bed or whatever? And because I had no idea where female pleasure came from. I had no idea I even had a clitoris. And so, I remember going to high school and I got all the reproduction talks, right? I knew all about menstruating and all of that stuff, but I had no idea about the female anatomy. How many 60-year-old women, and this was in my late 40s, but how many 60-year-old women do you have coming in they're going, well, what about, like you say, masturbation? And they're like, why and where would I do that? Like, I remember listening to Jodi Hildebrandt's niece say, when she was accused of masturbation, she said, I don't even know how to do that. I didn't even know that women could masturbate, So do you run into that where we don't even know our own bodies? How pathetic is that?
No, there's definitely a lot of that. And there's definitely generational gaps, So I think the older we are, the less likely it was that we got some of this education, even in the public school systems here in the United States, due to all the abstinence approaches and how religion and government has always been in bed with each other in this country. And so you're not giving children, adolescents, and emerging adults accurate information about their bodies. This is not an uncommon story. I've heard many, many women throughout my career tell me, what is the clitoris? What does that mean? Do I have one? Mine working, maybe mine is broken. It's not like a bone that you can break, right? And so even under the most horrific of circumstances with female
mutilation.
Yes, female mutilation, which is, a pretty horrific practice, usually found in the Muslim communities, they're basically damaging the outer layer of the clitoris. But the clitoris is this very large organ that's actually mostly internal. So even people who've been through that kind of a procedure, which of course can lead to complications and genital pain and things, but they still many times can reach orgasm, can have pleasure, because there's so many different ways to access or to put pressure against the clitoris, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times people are like, oh, I love vaginal sex. I'm like, well, your vagina is not that interesting. It's kind of like this sheath. Mm-hmm. But it is flanked by the clitoral legs, right? And so when you're having vaginal stimulation, whether that's digitally or with a dildo or with a penis, that's pushing up against those clitoral bulbs, right? That are flanking this kind of like tube that it's your vagina. And that's what feels really yummy, right? And so most pleasure, even dreams, like, so there's people like, well, I didn't even touch myself at all and I had an orgasm. And I'm like, yeah. And your pelvic floor muscles squeezed. And guess when they're squeezing, what's happening? They're stimulating your clitoral glands and all those nerve endings. And then that goes back to the brain. And, so it's just this beautiful kind of like internal system between brain and body that will get your arousal and your pleasure going. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, so people don't know that. We have kept sexual education in this country to be reproductive. That's why everybody's familiar with the RAM, what the uterus looks like.
Yeah.
Clitoris, as far as people can tell, doesn't have a reproductive focus, or which isn't true necessarily either, right? Because of course, if you have clitoral stimulation and you have a very strong clitoral orgasm, there's some theory that can help with impregnation or help get the sperm up into your, cervix area and all that stuff to kind of help with impregnation. So it's not necessarily that it has zero reproductive function, maybe, but it's not like a direct reproductive function, right, that the clitoris has. So then nobody talks about it. So we don't do sexual education from the place of pleasure. We do sexual education only from the place of reproduction. Wow. And that has been a huge mistake and a huge tragedy because, when people can't learn how to enjoy their own bodies, this really kind of goes against like human rights. There's so many human rights that have to do with the right of education, the right of bodily autonomy, the right of pleasure. And just with sexual education alone, we're going against those three human rights.
Right. And there's so much in Christian teachings, especially if they're huge followers of Paul and his idea of where sexual pleasure comes into being godlike, or the teachings of Jesus supposedly and things like that, where sex is literally for reproduction purposes. And so then there's this whole idea where, you only have sex to have children, and you're done having children now, you've gone through menopause. So there's why would you want to have sex? I don't understand why you'd want to have sex. I don't understand what the issue is. Can't you just hold hands and watch a movie and feel close to each other? And that's supposed to be the norm. That is considered the norm. And but once you go to a doctor and you start getting like hormone replacement therapy for other things, you find like, well, I'm having a hard time sleeping. Oh, your progesterone is off. Let's give you some progesterone. Oh, all of a sudden I'm sleeping like a baby. Oh, wow. So that didn't have anything to do with sex. That was my health. That's my health in general. And your estrogen for your bone health and all this kind of stuff. So there's so much more to it. I remember the first time I went to my naturopath and she put me on hormone replacement therapy. And, after a few weeks, I'm like, we need to adjust the dosage a little bit here, because I am like, looking at, is there where can we have sex? Didn't we just do it? I know, but we do need to do this again. And, my poor husband was like, what is happening to you? And I'm like, I might be a little overdosed. I might have a little bit too much testosterone going through the system here. We had to adjust the dosage, but the energy and everything else that, comes, how important it is to do exercise and to build muscle in your old age. And if your testosterone is zero, you're going to have a really hard time building muscle in your older age. There's so much to it. It's not just about sex. But, I love Suzanne Summers, her and her husband, they bragged about their sex life. And she was very open she gave him his testosterone shots once a week. And up until the day that she died, they had a healthy, happy sex life. And they looked at each other with that dreamy teenage look in their eyes, because there was a sexual attraction as well as just, I love you for who you are. And I hear the pain in women's voices, like you mentioned, Lila. They come to their awakening in their late 60s, and they're mourning what they've lost. They've not only lost, their youth, their personality or their goals or their dreams, but they lost the best times of their life. Like you were saying, now they've got arthritis or they've got some kind of physical, or maybe their husband has an illness. And so now they've turned into a caregiver. Yeah. And so they're mourning more than just, they lied to me but there's so much more. Do you hear that in your practice, Natasha, where women are just, I gave up everything and now look, here I am? Or what do you hear?
Yeah, no, that for sure is a very common theme. And I've seen that theme again, kind of regardless of where people are at religiously, you know, even still in, but especially if they've left, there is a sense of loss. There's a sense of like, what does this mean? How can I go forward? What did I sacrifice? Right. And we do socialize women in particular to be very accommodating, to be the caretakers in our society, right? So it's not just the children. Oftentimes it's like, these are the people who are taking care of elderly folks, you know, and elderly family members, and accommodating, you know, a lot of the emotional labor in the home, accommodating a lot of the domestic labor in the home. So people can be really tired and bitter and angry. And there's some like, there's a lot of jokes about menopausal women, right? And how they kind of become bitchy. And you know, and it's all blamed on menopause, and it's all blamed on hormones. And I do think the hormones play a role in that. Oftentimes, though, it's also the first opportunity where people can actually sit with those feelings and express them. And I don't know that the hormones are bringing out fake feelings. I think the hormones are allowing for those feelings to finally come out. Those hormonal shifts.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I even in my own daughters, I love listening to them now that they're in their 40s, you know, and they're talking about getting to that point in their life where they're like, I don't care what you think of me. This is what I'm doing, or this is what I actually said to a teacher. I can't believe this came out of my mouth, but I said, you know, this to a teacher. But Lila, do you have how old are your girls?
My oldest daughter is 42.
Yeah. So do you see that in her as well, or you know, this kind of coming of age, as they say?
Yeah, I think I remember when I was her age. It doesn't seem that long ago, and she's very much like I was. But the thing about her, and she might be an anomaly, she's very wise, has always been very wise, even as a child. So like she's always had this very overarching sort of way of looking at everything, and she's coming into her own right now. I mean, she's the healthiest I've ever seen her. She is fit, she is strong, she's all over TikTok. She's got her own following. She's a life coach also. I mean, she's just doing it. But she only had 3 kids, you know. I had 7.
I was going to say, not 7.
There's a difference there as far as energy and focus and effort. You know, I think about, when I was 42, I had a baby.
Yeah.
So, you know, our lives are different. And she lives in California and is beautiful, and she has a swimming pool. And I mean, I look at her and think, wow, she's doing great. She's doing great. So, and then I have other ones that are in the midst of their childbearing, and they're having difficulties, and it's hard work. And they're like stressed out and tired and frustrated, you know, so it really depends on where you are in life. And I was married 33 years, and I could say almost that entire time I was not me. I was a stressed out version of me. I was a frustrated, guilt-ridden version of who I really am. And my boyfriend always says to me, I think you're who you've always been. This is who you've always been, but you weren't able to be it.
Yeah.
And that comes from the religion too. You know, he was talking to a woman at the he was drive-through, and she had one of the head coverings. She must have been from Afghanistan or somewhere, I don't know, in the Middle East. And he said, I really love your scarf or whatever she was wearing over her head. And as we drove away, I said, you know, that's because they're not allowed to show their hair, right? And he was shocked. He said, I had no idea. I thought it was just a style that they wore. And I said, no, this is oppression. Mm-hmm. This is what oppression looks like for women. You're not allowed to show your hair because it's too seductive or something. I don't even know why. Maybe Natasha can tell me why they have to wear the head coverings. in that country.
Yes, no, it is for definitely very similar reasons as we have for covering our shoulders. These are all kind of modesty rhetoric spaces. I know, having talked to several Muslim practicing women, you know, they have a different perspective. They don't see it as oppressive necessarily, or at least not all of them. You know, just like in Mormonism, there's going to be a big
My garments.
spectrum, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're going to, you know, oftentimes the critique is like, well, we're protecting ourselves from the objectification of culture, right? And so, but even in that argument, it's still all about, either way, you're objectifying the female body, right? Whether it's a nude body or a covered body, it's being used in purposes for usually male gaze, you know, capitalistic, opportunist, you know, kind of spaces. So I think all female bodies, or most female bodies, have grown up in cultures where there's been a lot of that. There's some indigenous cultures that didn't have as much of that, but we're losing more and more access to those kinds of cultures. So it's just, it is very, very concerning. But going back to kind of what I think both of you were talking about this anger and this sadness and this regret. And I think it's very important to feel all of that and to own it and to, you know, like really kind of do some inner work around what that's about, while at the same time eventually getting to some perspective. Because if you stay in that kind of like what if scenario, angry scenario, I've lost everything scenario, then that can, you know, first of all, exacerbate anxiety and depression and things like that. But it also gives you, I think, not necessarily a very good perspective of that this is a bit of the human dilemma currently.
Yeah.
In fact, most people are not having the best sex of their lives in their 20s and 30s.
Right.
Even though that's maybe where our hormones are most balanced and where we have our most youthful bodies. Even if you don't grow up religious, we grew up in cultures where there's a lot of sexual pressure, a lot of sexual performance. Like you have to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way, all those shoulds, right? And that interferes with pleasure, with authenticity, with even just figuring out your own identity. You know, we have such a huge issue in these conservative cultures with people not even really being allowed to understand their sexual fluidity, their attractions. You know, am I bisexual? Am I a lesbian? Am I gay? These are things that aren't even really explored, right? And then adding gender identity to all of that. So I think that most people actually have the best sex of their lives more in their like 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah.
By that time, you're kind of, like you're saying, you're kind of in a different developmental adult place. You're starting to care less what others think of you. You're starting to embrace your body, even if you're a person of size or disability, or, you know, however we're showing up in our bodies. It's like, this is my body, you know, take it or leave it. Get like F off, you know. So it's and then there's more education, there's more permission giving. So I just want to really, you know, make very clear that attitude matters. And not that I'm trying to self-blame, you know, like victim blame, but, you know, the research has shown that, that especially women who embrace second half of life, who really work on feeling desirable and sexy. And this didn't matter if they were overweight or had wrinkles or had a mastectomy or their breasts are sagging, but those women report higher satisfying sex lives than women who are focused on their stretch marks and their fat tummies and saw themselves as, you know, old or dried up, or, you know, my season is over. So 40 is the new 30, you know, 50 is the new 40, like that. Those are actually really good ideas, you know, like how do we, I know that my mom, this was a huge message that she gave me throughout her life, and she's in her 80s now. And she's like, do not ever think about your age. You know, you are you, you're still you. And everything that I was excited about and that got me, you know, juiced up and feeling good in life when I was in my 40s, I still feel that way now in my 80s. Right. And I'm like, thank you, Mom, for that message. Yeah, it's a good reminder.
That's so great. And I love too that, and I've heard this before too, you're no longer worried about pregnancy. The kids are grown and gone, hopefully. Please get out of my house. And you know, you've got your house to yourself. You're free to explore your sexuality with your partner in a way that you've never been able to. I mean, when we were younger, we did the best that we could, and I'm hiding my lingerie. I thought I was hiding it, and I find out later, the kids found it. They, they knew mom and dad were having a great life, because I thought a little box up in my closet. Kids are so nosy; they go through all your drawers and all kinds of things, and but you just got that thing. It's like almost like being a teenager where you're trying to sneak out, get around your parents, because you got these kids at home. But all of a sudden in your 50s and your 60s, it's like everybody is gone. I can go out and get something out of the refrigerator naked if I want to, doggone it. And so it should be the best time of your life, really. It can be, and for many reasons. And I want to just take a second, Natasha, and show one of your TikToks, because I love your righteous anger with this. So let me make sure. I love this. So
Okay.
Totally took me off. One, when it comes to addressing low desire in the DSM, the female version includes the lack of receptivity, whereas the male version does not. Yeah, gender stereotypes are playing a role in diagnosis. Somehow women are supposed to be more receptive than men. That's a classic passive role. Even in the dictionary, one of the definitions of receptivity is literally the readiness of a female animal to mate. 2, the research shows that traditional gender roles, such as female passivity, can undermine sexual desire in women. Wow! So round and round it goes. We're going to expect women to show up passive. This in of itself decreases desire, and then we're going to pathologize them with low desire disorder because they're not exhibiting receptivity. I could literally scream. Round and round, it definitely goes. Come join me for my Reclaiming Female Sexuality group. Starts tomorrow. I still have a few spots. Let's scream and claim and heal together.
I love that. Now, how long ago was that? Do you still have your sexuality group?
I think I did that last week. And so we started the group, and I throw these groups, like probably twice a year. I try to hold both Reclaiming Female Sexuality groups and male sexual shame groups. And it's really for folks who are really trying to deconstruct all of this shame and, just all the messaging, right? All the messaging that we got that really interferes with so many things. But yeah, it's kind of maddening, right? We do know that, female bodies and male bodies can show up slightly differently, but not statistically differently, right? So this idea that men are high drive and men are initiators and men are the aggressors and men are insatiable and men are, all they can think about is with their other head, and it's just not really that accurate. And what's so interesting is that female bodies, as we've been researching them more and more, that gap of like sexual interest is lowering over the years as women get what? More independent, more educated, and more financially stable on their own. So this whole idea of the 1950s, where it was the men who had all the affairs and the men who had all the sex, and well, yeah, she's stuck at home with her 1950s, oven and cute little dress, and how she was supposed to show up like all made up by all these expectations, right, of what a good wife was. That's going to kill your sexual drive. Who wants to have sex, under those circumstances? Whereas he's going out into the world and has lots of opportunities to meet other people. Well, as women entered the workforce, that gap of who's having affairs and who's having more sexual interest has decreased significantly. Yeah. So it just is really interesting that, but yeah, those roles, like I remember in the 80s, I'm a little bit younger, I think, than both of you by maybe a decade or something, but I grew up in the 80s as a teen. And the idea that I would ask a boy to a dance or to a date was unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of, right? Wow. I had to wait. I had to sit around passively and see if by any chance I could throw out, energy or aura to attract somebody who I might want to go out on a date with, right? And so when you're approaching your sexuality from a passive space, I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to wait and be awakened. It's kind of like, think about Sleeping Beauty. What's the metaphor there, right? She lies beautifully still, and then it's the male body who comes and awakens her, right? And then only at that time can she be awakened. Let's not understand that isn't a message from old mythology that is with us still, right?
Yeah.
So then you're not.
So sadly, as you're saying, the whole idea of turning on and off your sexuality, like before, before you're married, zero sexual interests, zero sexual content, connection at all. And then, ta-da, I now pronounce you man and wife, go to the hotel, get it on like a crazy person, and not understanding how female bodies work. So you talk about that first time, and the women are crying. It's horrible. It's a horrible experience. Like you say, men at that time, their testosterone levels are higher. It doesn't take much to get them interested in it. And they're like, what's the big deal? We don't even understand how that works. And women, that is the beginning of their entire, your husband needs it. You need to provide for, and the whole idea that women don't even have an interest in sex, or like you were talking about, that women aren't receptacle immediately like a man is. And that's so, it sets up a lifetime of hurt and discouragement and frustration. And I don't see a lot of teachings in the church changing that, because they'd actually have to talk about sexuality.
Yeah, they don't. They won't talk about it.
Yeah.
They don't want to. They think, this is what my mother thought too, that by not talking about it, you won't think about it and you won't do it if they don't talk about it. Like, it makes it go away. It actually has the opposite effect. It's like anything that's taboo, don't you think?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that's all you can think about because it's so hush hush. You're like, but I'm feeling my body, and it feels these things, but you're acting like that doesn't exist. So I have to hide this. I mean, as an 8-year-old, I already knew how to masturbate. I know a little girl, I saw her do it in the middle of a family prayer. I watched her, she was maybe 3. And I had my eyes open, like, oh my gosh, she's going for it. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, right through the prayer. And I thought, she's only 3 years old and she knows how to do
She
that.
discovered her body.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Discovering our bodies in the womb, right? I mean,
I've heard that
our relationship with our bodies are from birth until death. But yes, we try to pretend that sexuality just only somehow emerges during these decades where you're heterosexually married, right? But we are self-soothing. I mean, touching your genitalia as a baby feels just like sucking your thumb or pulling on your ear. It's self-soothing. It feels good, right? To touch parts of your body.
Sexual
because
into it, right? They're just soothing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. In fact, your comment reminded me of just something somebody said in my last class. It was like, it was no, no, no. And then at 3:00 on a certain Saturday afternoon, it was go, go, go. I guess that's when she got married.
Yeah.
And she's like, how are we supposed to do that? And I think even if we're the things that you said, when we're facing our sexuality from the perspective of, I've got to keep him happy, I've got to keep other women away from him, I've got to make sure he's not tempted to have an affair or look at pornography. It's, where is there room for your drive in all of that? Where is there room for what you actually want? It's all focused on the other person and the community and the children. And boy, is that the least sexy thing that you can do for yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much that goes into that is unspoken. There's like a subconscious idea that's taught throughout Christianity, especially, and culturally, definitely, and culturally, that, like, I just got through listening to a fabulous podcast, the Data Over Dogma with Dan McClellan. And he has a biblical scholar on there. She is a hoot, but she's just talking about how, we just need to understand that women were property. Women were owned. They took a woman. And even in our marriage today, even though we now contextualize that phrase differently, I take, do you take this woman as your, lawfully wedded wife or whatever? The word take back in those days literally means I took her and she is now mine. And, so that whole idea is still subconsciously taught that you belong to me. And when I get you, I need to have you undefiled. I need to have you a virgin so that I will be the first person to, do the conquest. And so that's still taught. We tried to put flowers over it with the licked cupcake and the chewed gum and all of that. But the mentality was, I will be the one to spray you, mark my territory, because you are my property. And so there's still that idea that men have, that you now belong to me. And that kind of goes into, like you were saying, Lila, with the hijab and any other, modesty type clothing, is like, well, no, you belong to me. And therefore nobody else will look at you because you are my property. Yeah. And, I've gotten to where, like I said, Natasha, my husband and I discuss what our values are. And I'll say to him, are you comfortable with me wearing this? Does this make you uncomfortable? And, I respect him enough to say, look, I'm not going to dress up in something that this is really uncomfortable for you. And of course, he's a smart man. So he's like, no, you just wear whatever you want to, so I've taught him well, but, but so there is that whole idea, and it's still taught. Subconsciously, it's still taught, and then we absorb that, like you were saying, and we believe, well, this is I have my job now. My job is to multiply and replenish the earth, be my husband's helpmate, and serve in the community. And like I said on one of my other podcasts, the day they make a man the compassionate service leader in the ward, it's a miracle. That would be a miracle, Right.
I have to do something really quick.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys remember this or if you were taught this. So I was at BYU when I was young, and I was taking a marriage and family relations class, and the teacher was somebody Barlow, and he's well known, but he taught this idea that, and he made this very important, we all had to write an essay on this, that we as women should never use sex as a weapon. And he said, what that means is withholding it if you're angry, giving it if they're good boys, using it as some sort of control mechanism. And I never had sex. I was 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, sure. And I wrote an essay about it, oh yeah, I would never do that. I would never do that. No, because sex is beautiful and I want to have that with my husband, and I would never use it as a weapon, blah, blah, blah. And I got an A on my paper. And then I got married. And it was like, no, you treat me like that, I'm not having sex with you. Hell no. Get away from me. And then I realized, oh, I'm using sex as a weapon. But how do you not? This is what, for me, it was such an emotional thing. It was like, I'm laying myself basically out here for you to use for your pleasure. I may or may not enjoy it. 90% of the time I wasn't, but sometimes. And it was like, what am I getting out of this exactly? I'm getting, he's not going to go have an affair on me. That's what I'm getting out of this. If I do this, it's like this transactional thing, right? Yeah. And I felt so angry about that. And I remember thinking, if God wasn't a man, I'd have a chat with him about this, but he's not going to get it. He won't ever understand this.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things that's really tragic about that story is that language was just not being defined correctly, right? I do think that anything can be used as a weapon. Weapons for me are more like manipulative. I want to get something out of this. What you're talking about is having a construct, having a setting where we're both feeling emotionally and physically and intellectually safe and comfortable enough to be able to engage in sexual activity. And that differs for people. For some people, they'll say, well, I feel closer to you emotionally if we've had physical contact first, right? And for other people, it's like, well, I feel more close to you if we've had emotional contact first. And then, and then that helps me be physical with you. Yeah. And oftentimes, as I've worked with so many couples, usually they differ in this one department out of many departments. And so then it's like, well, how do we talk about that? How do we negotiate that? How do we compromise that with that? How do we respect no's, right? How do we respect that we're not always going to be, it's impossible for two people to always be on the same wavelength when it comes to libido and horniness and, sexual desire. And sometimes you can lean into that in healthy ways. And all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I wouldn't have had sex with you if it was up to me, but boy, this ended up being really nice. That's called responsive desire, right? But other times if you're forcing yourself, well, oh, now if I don't do this, they're going to think I'm weaponizing sex, and I'm not going to, they're going to be upset with me and pout for the next few days. That's not weaponizing. That's just like really bad negotiation and feelings that are not going to help that pleasure and desire. Pleasure has, this is like pleasure is the measure. It comes from Emily Nagoski, right? Come as you are. That if you don't have some level of pleasure, then you're really training your body to show up in a sexual way that it's not wanting to anticipate. And that's why over time, something like duty sex can become like PTSD. That's the work of Dr. Ken Hurst, who just came out with her research on that. And because you're really training your body to anticipate a negative experience. And so your body starts being more and more like not wanting to. And so
the resentment level, I'm always doing what I don't want to do for you. And as if, I haven't been working all day, pleasing all these kids, and now it's time, and I can't even go to sleep. Now I have to do something else for someone else. And he would be like, but I'm the husband. This is your job. You're supposed to do this. He really felt entitled. I don't want to talk bad about him. That's not fair. He's a good man. He was a fabulous man in so many ways. And I really did care for him deeply. And he's passed on, so he can't even be here to
defend himself.
So I don't want to do that. But I will say, I'm accepting that I was looking at it from a defective point of view because of my upbringing and the way that it was pathologized. Like it was like this is your duty to take care of your man. And even if you don't want to, like you're supposed to lay there and think about something else and go to your happy place for a minute because, this is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think this is about men being bad, women being good, people weaponizing. This is just zero skills in sexual negotiation and tons of entitlement that's baked into the system.
Yes.
Even monogamous marriage, not that I'm anti-monogamous marriage, I don't want to say that, but I'm just saying the system itself sets it up so that these sexual needs of two people can only and will only be met within the construct of those two people.
Yes.
So that system in of itself puts pressure instead of pleasure for either one of them, and I think the complaints that I hear from both sides of this libido, wound are very normal. Like both, one person's usually saying, well, I want to feel desired. I want to feel like you want me. I don't want to beg you for sex. I want to feel like I am, in a partnership with somebody who wants to initiate with me and who wants to have this sexual life with me. And then there's another person who's like, I don't want to, every time you bring this up and I feel pressured and I feel broken. I feel like I can't be enough for you. And you can just see how these are dilemmas that are just very heartbreaking for either person in either situation. And we have zero skills and zero structure to help us really do these negotiations well. And then our egos get hurt and we're all bet hurt in one way or another. And we're all sad. And then we're still supposed to have sex with each other.
It's never addressed at church. It's never addressed by anyone. We're listening to other broken people tell us what they do, like my visiting teacher or whatever,
Right.
I wish one of Boy K. Packer's kids would come on and tell us the real story about that poor guy. Because even years before I even thought about, leaving the church, I called him the sex apostle. And I'm like, oh Lord, here he goes again. It's like this man is obsessed with sex. And I'm like, something's going. It reminds me of a stake president that we had, that same thing. He'd come and speak at in our ward, and he'd talk about women going on vacation and how dare you put a picture of yourself in a bikini? What kind of a example are you setting for the young women in your ward? And then unfortunately his daughter was the same age as my daughter, so I'd get a lot of little tips on what was going on at home, and there was a lot of talks about boobs, and I remember one time he came and spoke in our ward, and then afterwards we broke to go into Sunday school, and we were all standing out in the hallway waiting for people to get out of the classrooms, and I watched him stand there in the hallway, and as women would walk by, he would just look them up and down. I'm like, oh, you're a pervert. That's why you talk about this all the time, and it's just like, there's always a secondary story. But one of the things you said, Natasha, was I was listening to another sex therapist, and she was talking about the roles that women play and how men often will say, she never initiates sex. I wish she would be the one to initiate sex more often. And her idea, you have to tell me what you think about this. She said, look, if I find a spider or a mouse in the house, who's going to find it? Well, the husband goes, that's my job. He goes, all right. And if and who takes out the garbage? Well, that's my job. It's kind of these jobs that just kind of these roles that we all fall into, changing the oil in the car, whatever. Most of the time it's like, yeah, he's going to do it. He goes, it's your job. Just think of it as this is your job. She needs her engine warmed up a little bit. She's not going to just come up to you and then, bingo, bango. Thank you, ma'am. She needs to say, hey, can I give you a foot massage, or can I bring you a glass of wine, or can we sit and watch this movie together, or can we do something else so that she can get her engine revved up a little bit, because it takes women a little bit more time. And I thought, well, that's a unique way of looking at it. It's kind of like, well, okay, you're happy with your job that you changed the oil in the car. What if it was just looked at it like, that's your job, start the engine a little bit earlier and get things going. Have you ever heard that before? Or what do you think about that?
I think that might work for some people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Most of these solutions. And I want to be very careful too, that we're not just assuming that men are the higher libido partners. I mean, I have worked with many. I really don't see that anecdotally of a difference in my partnerships that are heterosexual. And oftentimes if the woman is higher drive, she can be really angry. She can be like, not only do I do everything for the kids and for the house and for this and for that, but now I have to take care of our sex life too. And it doesn't feel like the gender stereotypes. Like, I thought I'd be chased. I thought I'd be pursued. I thought I'd be, because again, we're functioning under that assumption that that's how it would look like. And then you're not even doing that part of what you're supposed to be doing as a man, right? And of course, if a man's hearing that, you can assume what's happening to both his penis and his ego, right? It's like, so, I mean, it's just, so these are just struggles. And I think sometimes there is some acceptance, like this is kind of how we show up, and this is how we're different, and how can we help each other? I think sometimes if you're the higher libido partner and your partner is leaning into responsive desire, I really encourage people to see that as a huge effort, right? So it's like, oh, if you initiate, that makes me feel wanted. Well, what about reframing that this person's leaning into responsive desire, and that's how they're communicating that you're very wanted, right? And that they really care about you and that they're really willing. I think sometimes there can be like scheduling erotic opportunities is something that helps with a lot of folks, right? So it's like we can anticipate this moment in time where we're going to connect in this way instead of either one of us initiating per se. We're just going to kind of set aside kind of like a date night, but for sexy time. Although I usually recommend not to put the pressure of actual sex, especially if you're considering that intercourse sex. More like erotic opportunity. We'll see what happens. It's not like we have to have sex, right? Because then that can kind of blow up in your face. And then another thing is, as you're telling me about this woman, I'd be curious to be like, well, why aren't you initiating? Like, that's not even asked, right? Yeah. What would it take for you to initiate? Why is it because you're functioning under old, kind of messaging and not feeling comfortable or feeling awkward and naive? I mean, how many women have I worked with that are in their 50s and 60s but feel like little girls when being more sexually assertive? And that's not fun. It's not fun to feel like I'm not, in so many other areas of my life, I feel very smart and respected and experienced. But here I am saying, "Oh, I want to suck your dick," feels like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like a little 15-year-old, and
Yeah.
and to lean into either eroticism or dirty language or raunchy fun play, and it can feel very intimidating
Yeah.
sometimes when, again, you weren't really allowed to show up in any way other than this kind of vanilla, um, passive sexual person. Not that there's anything wrong with vanilla or passive, because those can be fun
Yeah.
things to play too.
Yeah.
But when that's where you were like stuck, that's not
Yeah.
what's great.
Well,
So
and I
there's
agree with that because I remember listening to her and she was talking about massage and all this stuff. And I thought, you know, that's not a thing for me. When I go in and get a massage, I always get a deep tissue massage. I mean, I literally want my muscles replaced, taken over here and put back over here. And so I don't look at massage as a sensual type thing. That's just not my love language, I guess. So when she talked a lot about that and doing this and doing that and bring her a glass of wine, I'm like, well, I don't drink. And so there goes that. And then it's like, it's like, well, we don't have the same taste in movies. So I don't want to sit and watch a movie with you. And, so there, I mean, you have to find your thing, right? It's just like the whole love language. It's like going for a walk together would probably do more for me than asking me if you can do a foot massage. That would be like, yeah, no, don't touch my feet, or something like that. So that's really important. I like that you said that. It's like, well, that might work for some people. That's not the recipe for everybody.
right.
So, and I like that idea too, the verbalization where you feel like, well, that's not me. I'm not comfortable with that.
And especially as we're aging, what maybe used to work for us no longer works for us. Maybe things that we never dreamed would work for us, now we're kind of interested in. So this is an ongoing discussion. And whether you're with the same partner for 40 years plus, or whether you're divorced or widowed and you're starting to date new partners, it's like, this is, I think, where the rubber hits the road, is we don't know how to talk. We don't know how to talk about these things, how to be more comfortable communicating and saying, can we have a conversation where we just have where we just express, where we put things on the table. Just because something's on the table doesn't mean we have to pick it up just quite yet, and we can explore, what are our fantasies? What are the things that you'd like to try? What now is uncomfortable? Why have you been avoiding me? Why have you been pursuing me more than normal? Right. And so, yeah, I think it's conversations, and I don't know what's making that noise all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think it's my headphones. Yeah.
So as long as we're willing to get creative, and again, get beyond penetrative sex. So we have to understand that erections past the age of 40 are going to start changing for a male body, whether he can stay hard as long, whether he can get hard in the first place. Even sometimes things like delayed ejaculation can start showing up, where it takes longer to orgasm. We need to get away from sexual success, meaning we have an orgasm, we get hard, and we lubricate. Those are all very measurable ways that we're looking for our body to respond. But whether or not you're hard, you can actually have an orgasm. Whether or not you've had an orgasm, you can have tons of pleasure. I just got done with a lovemaking session this morning that went for about 2 hours, 0 orgasm. Am I sad about that? Nope. That was a great connection time, lots of time. It was beautiful. So, and also getting beyond penetration. Now, as our vaginal tissues and our vulval tissues are losing estrogen, we also lose elasticity. So sometimes it can become more painful. I will say that if you don't penetrate the vagina often enough or long enough, it can kind of collapse on you. So don't assume that your vagina will always be open, especially to your 80s and 90s. If you don't use it, you will lose it, per se.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, whether or not that matters to you can depend, right? Because maybe it's like, I'm kind of past intercourse play. I want outer course play. We used to call this foreplay, but it's so interesting that foreplay, which is generally like sucking, kissing, touching, all the outer stuff that people would do is the number one effective way for a female body to have an orgasm. But isn't it interesting that we languaged it like it's before, it's the foreplay, and even this language that you have of revving her up. Why are we revving her up? Oh, to get to the intercourse for the man. And I'm no, no, this like, intercourse is one type of sexual activity, and you can you can penetrate a vagina, you can penetrate an anus, you can do that with all different types of ways, you can penetrate a mouth, but so much of what's happening that's pleasurable for either a female or a male body is really about touch, erogenous zones, and we've got so many of them, and penetration does not need to be part of the equation to have some of the best sex of your life. So this is what we want to be really creative about. And sometimes we have to grieve that, like, oh, we've been really used to penetrative sex. We both would have an orgasm pretty much around the same time. And we were just really good at that. And now it's changing. Our bodies are changing. Our hormones are fluctuating. We're not reaching orgasm in the same way we used to. I have lost now 3 different types of ways that I used to orgasm very quickly. And just with my shifts and changes in age, not so much anymore. So I've had to get creative. Is that frustrating at times? Sure, I can be frustrated for 10 minutes. But if I stay frustrated, then I'm just going to be interfering more and more with the pleasure I can find out now. So this is what's up for us, right? As we're aging, I think you have to be intentional. We know that sexuality has many, many benefits, from cardiovascular health to moving your blood around, especially in your genital areas. It keeps everything kind of more juicy and flowing the more times you get aroused. It helps with stress. It helps with chronic pain. And it's not orgasm, it's sexual pleasure, helps with all of these things. So there's a lot of reasons why you may want to intentionally prioritize your sex life. There are other people that are just like, this chapter of my life is over. I'm not really that interested in it. Maybe I'm gray sexual. Maybe I'm asexual and was never allowed to be asexual because I was in this very heteronormative, duty sex type of situation. I'm just not that interested in sex. My life is very, full and wonderful without sex, and I don't really want to prioritize it. That's fine too. I'm just saying, know that there are benefits to it. Know that intentional approaches are going to give you much more success. And then get proactive about the many ways we can get creative and have fun and center on pleasure versus performance, duty, or the shoulds that are out there.
The end. That was beautiful. What a perfect way to end this broadcast, because that is exactly the message that I wanted to send. Tell everyone, you do not only live support groups, but virtual support groups as well. So tell everyone, if they're interested in what we've talked about today, how they can get a hold of you or join one of your support groups.
Yeah, for sure. So pretty much everything I do, you can find at natashahelfer.com. I work with individuals and couples, right? Just for therapy or coaching services, depending on where you're at and what you're needing. But I do offer a lot of groups because I feel like I want to be able to help many more people than what I can see just in 1 hour. So I run groups on all kinds of things, sexual, connected, including faith transition groups, and also kind of more niche groups like ethical non-monogamy or mixed orientation marriage, or even how do we, if we've left religion together, how do we want to recontract our marriage and our sexuality groups? I run kind of like post-religious marriage groups and things like that. All of my groups are online so that you can reach them regardless of where you're at kind of geographically. They're not therapy groups, they're educational support groups. So we can kind of offer that wherever you're at. I do run a once a month in-person faith transition group in the Holiday area in Salt Lake City, Utah. But even that group is also hybrid with Zoom. So you should be able to access everything I do regardless, because even if it's in person, I try to make it available to others. And then I also offer training for people who are therapists, right? So I am part of the Beeler Institute, where we teach people how to become sex therapists. I'm a supervisor in sex therapy. I'm also starting a new platform called learnreligiontherapy.com, where I'm training professionals to work with religious folks, because that's an area that we don't get much training in when we're going through our programs. And that can bring up a lot of different concerns for a lot of different people. So,
wow, that's beautiful. And all of you follow her. She's on TikTok. She's on Instagram. Are you on Facebook?
I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are kind of the three main ones I'm on. I'm on Twitter as well, or I guess X or whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
I don't use that very much. Oh, and I did want to say, so April 20th, for anybody who's in the Utah area, we are having a female sexual retreat, a one-day retreat, and it's going to be all day long. And I'm going to have like several guests, like Kristen Hodson's going to be joining me. She's a great sex therapist. Nuance Ho, Cara Burrell is going to be joining me. There's going to be some breath work and massage work, people coming. So it's just going to be kind of a lovely all day long thing where we're going to be really diving into how to celebrate your sexuality if you're in a female body, how to claim it, how to do so many of the things we've been talking about today. So I have that. And I also have a couples retreat coming up in October. So if you're interested in kind of getting away with your spouse, and focusing on your relationship, both sexually and emotionally, that's another offering I'm giving.
That's so fabulous. Well, I just hope that there are women that are watching and women that will watch that can get up the nerve to, like you say, embrace their sexuality, embrace their femininity, embrace the joy that they have of being a woman, and just begin to explore and accept and start living their best life and become invisible. That's my goal. So thank you so much. This has been, you go start your week. She's got a birthday coming up, people, and she's going to start celebrating in like 5.3 seconds. As soon as she gets off here, she's on her way. So happy birthday. I appreciate you spending your Sunday morning with us today.
Thank you, Lila.
Natasha.
Thank you. I could talk sex all day long, right? So it's fun. Let's claim it. Let's own it. Let's do it on our own terms with the people that we love and want to be sexy with. So let's do all those yummy things.
I love it. I love it. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh my gosh. Lila, we should have just planned on a 5-hour.
I know.
Right?
Scratching the surface. There's so many things.
Oh, I know. I had someone say, ask her how good it is for women to have an orgasm. And I'm like, oh, we got to cut it off. We got to get going. But I mean, there's just so much information out there. And fortunately, I mean, I'm so glad that things are changing and that there is more information out there for women. My granddaughters are living such a better life than, they have such better communication with their moms than I ever had with my daughters. Yeah. And, they're so much more open than I ever was, because I was still living kind of like you. It's like, if we don't talk about it, it won't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one time telling a friend that my daughter's boyfriend, they walked out of their bedroom and did something. She goes, "You allowed him to be in their bedroom?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I don't care. I trust her." I mean, it's like, because, she goes to young women. She knows the difference between a right or wrong. What could happen? I mean, come on. I mean, just so naive and just believed if you don't talk about it, it won't happen. And
right, of course. Until it does.
It does. And you're like, oh, bummer. Yeah. Don't talk about birth control, because that way that'll give them permission to have sex and,
right.
All that.
All of that, man. I mean, we really could talk about so many. You should probably we should make a list of topics and then just go down them, because you could be podcasting forever on all of this. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah. And we'll take suggestions from the crowd. If you guys have anything you want to talk about, I just think it's so important. We talk a lot about the religion, but we don't talk about the effects of the religion on women specifically, right. and how that has changed our life and how that's changed our mothering and our grandparenting and everything else that goes into it. So if you guys have anything that you'd like to talk about, so it's amazing. Well, thank you as well, joining me on Sunday morning. Have a fabulous Valentine's Day. I don't know what that means for you. Yeah. So
I get myself a Valentine's outfit. I feel totally I'm in the wrong This is not the right thing.
You're doing St. Patrick's Day. You're ready for March. Here we go. All right. Talk to you later.
Yep,
See you next week. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. I'm not ready to quit. I wish I could have talked, but I knew that Natasha had plans for the day and she needed to get out the door. So I appreciate her taking time to speak with us all today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any subjects that you would like to talk about, please send them to me. I would love to hear your suggestions. I do, by the way, let me think, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yes, next week, get on TikTok and Instagram and look up Reverend Carla. I am going to be interviewing Reverend Carla. She is amazing. She is an ordained minister, but she is not what she calls churched. She is not affiliating with any church because she sees the danger in the patriarchy and the Christian nationalism that's going on right now and the damage that that's doing. She has a daughter that came out as LGBTQ+, and she is just dynamic, and she has a lot of services that she offers to people, and I get to talk with her. I am so excited. So tune in next Sunday when I talk with Reverend Carla, and I appreciate you spending your Sunday morning with me, and please do whatever you need to do to become visible. And after today, I'm talking visible, girlfriend. All right. We're not just talking loud and obnoxious. We're talking let it all out. Just have a great week. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.